Hello. I'm currently driving home from work. I've probably got about half an hour left. And I figured this was a perfect time for me to talk and discuss A Game of Thrones, which I finished yesterday. I don't know why I waited an extra day and watched Akira before thinking it was appropriate to now speak about it. It was probably wiser to immediately start talking, like right after I finished the book, but I didn't. I waited a day. I watched Akira. Akira was fantastic. I'm not going to discuss that movie in this review, but hopefully, subconsciously, it has impacted me to a point where I have a new understanding for this work of art, A Game of Thrones. Realistically speaking, probably not, but I guess we'll find out at the end of this. So, I watched Game of Thrones, probably around 2015 I got into it. I have had these books in my bookshelf for probably 6 months. And I've always told myself, I can't wait to read. One day, I'm going to read Game of Thrones. And then, maybe about 3 weeks ago, I was just daydreaming, looking at my bookshelf, and I realized that I already have these books. And they're my roommate's books, but they were in my domicile. So I just picked up the first one, and I got to work. And I didn't rush it. I actually really enjoyed the POV chapter format of it, because it felt a little easier to stop reading. There was more of a finite conclusion of like, okay, I'm going to finish the Catelyn chapter, and boom, we're done. And we're going to pick it up again at a Tyrion chapter, or a Daenerys chapter, versus chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. It felt more episodic, if I could put it like that. And it was good to read. And, okay, all in all, this is going to be very jumbled, as I'm sure the first 4 minutes of me not even discussing this book have indicated to you. But, long story short, this book was so much better than I ever could have expected. And I'll move over to the free folk. It is better than season 1. It's obviously very difficult to fully compare, 10 episodes of television versus an 800-page book. But now I get what they were talking about. I understand what they've been saying. And I guess this holds true to every single book series that were adapted into a movie or a TV show, is that, yes, a lot of stuff is missing from the Game of Thrones first season. Yes, it goes without saying, but I'm still going to say it, because I cared way more about virtually every single character. Every single one, but the ones that stood out the most were Catelyn, Sansa, and Jon. And Robb, even though Robb isn't a POV character. I guess I'll start with Robb. Robb is so much more interesting in the book. One, because it's nice that he's sort of alienated by not being a POV character. Even though he is a main character, you're hearing his story through the ones that know him, like through his mom. Specifically, I don't know, certain people are like, in Catelyn 7, I'm not there yet. It was a Catelyn chapter, right as he has called the banners and gone off to war. And just seeing Robb through her eyes of certain questions she had when she's asking if he's been kissed at some point, because he looks like he's an emboldened man now, but he's still the boy that she raised, and just her inner monologue surrounding him was so interesting to read. And by nature of them all being younger than the show version, Robb is so much more interesting as a 14-year-old than he is as a fully grown-up man Robb Stark in the show. And I think I get it. In the show, it makes more sense in the show for them to all be aged up. I get it. I understand why they chose that. That being said, there is a chapter, I believe it's a Bran chapter, early on in the book, where Robb has just taken power. He's just starting to learn how to rule over Winterfell. And as I believe these are members of the Night's Watch. No, they're Lannister men with Tyrion. And he says something along the lines of a courteous homeowner of, please, we welcome you to share meat and mead, sit at my table, blah, blah, blah. That general quote of, you're an honored guest. But through Bran, it's described as sounding awkward coming out of his mouth. Like, even Bran can recognize that this is not something he's comfortable saying. So I find Robb is just a character that is thrust into the position of power, like his dad, like Ned was. Really I've just enjoyed reading his story a lot more than the Richard Madden version. I think that's his name, Richard Madden, yeah. No, Richard Madden is a national news something Madden. Anyway, grown man in the show, it looks like he's had plenty of time to learn from his dad. A lot more time, 4 more years of training. So it's more of a comfortable position. You're not getting into his inner monologue, which you aren't in the book either, but you're not hearing anyone's internal perspective of him, of how he's changed, of how it's only been a few months, but he's completely different. I think Bran calls him Robb the King when he's referring to that version of Robb that is barking commands. Oh, and another thing. I'll go to every character, but another thing they did with Robb is the scene in the show where John Umber, I believe it's John Umber, threatens him at the table, and Robb's wolf bites off the guy's fingers. That's already badass as hell in the show. He's like, oh, my lord was just willing to cut my meat for me. That was great. But again, the book fleshes it out so much more with immediately cutting to a scene. Oh, the police. I hope they're not here for me for talking about a book while driving. Anyway, as I was saying, they cut to Bran's bedroom later that night, and Robb confesses that he was terrified and that he thought the Umber was going to kill him. So you still have that absolute badassery of he just wanted to cut my meat for me. But then still, he's 14, or at this point he's 15, but peeling behind him to just being a scared child, admitting that to his younger brother, just, he worked a lot better for me. Not that I hate show Robb, but show Robb, there's just less of an emotional investment there versus one that I heavily felt in the books. And true to that, Sansa is also significantly improved in the book. And this is, I guess, the reason for a lot of it is that George writes each chapter differently depending on which character it is. I'm sure this is not a revelation. If you read the book, you can figure this one out. A Tyrion chapter is written differently than a Jon chapter, which is written differently than a Ned chapter. And I love that for Sansa, because Sansa chapters are now like fairy tales through the perspective of a child who, in the show, same thing. Her beloved Joffrey, whimsical knights and King's Landing is a dream. But on the page, I guess I'm just trying to think of different words or different ways to say it was very compelling. But Sansa and her immaturity really works to her character. Like, you're reading a Sansa chapter and you're getting the information through her eyes, and you just, not that you like her, well, yeah, she's unlikable because of her ignorance, but that makes you like her more because in her head, she's not just, she doesn't seem, it's weird because they write her to be more delusional, but in doing that, it makes her seem less delusional, because when you hear her inner thoughts, it's like, okay, yeah, this is what she was raised to believe. Versus show Sansa, you're like, really? Like, what are you don't get much of a knowledge of her thoughts on Joffrey other than the outward, like, he's to be my prince, blah, blah, blah. But her description of him in her chapters, and then what that changes to in the final chapter after Ned dies, where now she just can't even imagine being attracted to him. Her, like, his his beautiful face is now just like revolting and ugly to her. Anyway, that was great. Real quick, Jon Snow, same thing. He's kind of a wet fart in the show. He becomes a lot worse later on, obviously. She's my queen. But I always found watching the show that the Jon Snow story was interesting to me because of the situation and the Night's Watch and their rules and the vows and the people beyond the wall and all that. But Jon himself was a blank canvas. But again, in the book, not at all. Bit of the immaturity, but most spitefulness. Just having the same story play out, but after someone says something to Jon, you get an inner line from his thoughts of insulting himself, little digs. He's more of a boy. You feel a lot more compassion for him. I felt more compassion for him and his situation to be more unfair based on his little, his inner mind of, these are to be my brothers, this is what I'm going to have to do, or maybe it's better this way, or when he longs about going home, when he says, like, I just want to play with Arya, tangent, we're going to jump from this little thought and ignore the rest of my point about Jon Snow. You get it, he's more interesting. The tangents about, I just wanted to play with Arya's head, play with her hair. All of these shared throughout the Starks and the Stark chapters. It's just sad because they just feel like a family. In Ned chapters, again, in the show, you can't hear what's going on in his head, or inside his head. You're never going to have a scene where he admitted out loud, because who would he say it to? Who would he say, I really miss my wife? They could have done it, but they didn't. But I'm glad, because I got to discover this for the first time in the book, is that all of the family spend their chapters missing each other. And it really kind of broke my heart, knowing that they're not going to come back together. You hear in the Arya chapters, and she says out loud, like, all I would have to do is take the King's Road, and in a fortnight I'd be back, and I'd be back with Bran. And I found it hit the most in the Ned chapters because he's going to die. So every now and then he's longing, and he's like, I wish I could be back watching Rickon. I wish I could watch Robb and Jon, play with their swords in the yard, or just to be with Catelyn. It's the longing for each other really broke my heart in a good way, because I would read these things and just be like, damn, ow. I would just do the little thing with my lip where I'm like, I want the Starks to be reunited. They just feel like they truly love each other, which, they're it was written that way, but their love really shines through. Okay, so a few instances that were done in the show that I thought were done better in the show. I thought that Ned's interaction with Cersei, his confession to her, was done better in the show. Of just certain scenes or endings of chapters were allowed to breathe a little more in the show, specifically that Cersei-Ned interaction. It's not bad at all in the books, and the dialogue is pretty much one-to-one, with the exception of where she tries to seduce him, which I'm glad they got rid of that. I'm glad they got rid of that part. Anyway, that interaction in itself was kind of rushed. The line where she hits him with the, if you play the Game of Thrones, you win or you die, still cold, no matter what version, okay? And my head is still having Lena Headey. Pretty much all the characters I'm thinking of the show versions, which is difficult when it's describing Renly as a younger version of Robb, and that Renly is jacked and black-bearded with long hair, and I'm thinking, show Renly looks absolutely nothing like that. And when they describe Tyrion, being like ugly as shit. I'm like, man, Peter Dinklage, they maybe should have casted Warwick Davis. They should have casted a less handsome actor, because I'm not gonna think of someone else when I'm reading Tyrion lines. I'm thinking Peter Dinklage, but then they're like talking about his ugly ass face, and I'm like, ah. Anyway, you just have to overlook. I guess I'll wait for more descriptions of the characters to annoy me even further, because they haven't done much to get rid of the Bran image in my mind, or the Sansa image in my mind. The Robb one, I was fine, even though he's 4 years younger. Throughout my read, I was picturing Richard Madden, which is what we're going to say his name was. And then at the end, during the Catelyn chapter, she says that he has like a light brown beard and like auburn hair. And then I was miffed by that, because that's not what he's supposed to look like. Anyway, I got way off track. Where was I? Moments I prefer in the show. The Cersei confession is just, it's paced a little bit better. Still great scene no matter what. I prefer it in the show. That being said, I think the reasoning makes more sense in the book, because Ned Stark, the consensus was he was kind of a dummy. And I agreed with that when I watched the show. I think George did a good job of helping you understand through, again, his inner monologue, why Ned isn't so fast to just tell Robb, knowing that the kids would get killed. I mean, there's even, I think it's about a sentence or less after Ned comes to the conclusion, where he thinks back to, I believe it's Rhaenys. I'm trying to get my Game of Thrones lore. Rhaenys, Elia Martell's daughter, Targaryen, was killed. And then he thinks about Aegon, who the Mountain killed. And it's just in his mind, he's like, the boy. Like, he can't even, like, it hurts him to even think about what they did to those babies. And I that worked for me. That was enough. Because it's still a stupid decision. And they even have Varys say it out loud. Of like, what compelled you to tell her that you knew the secret? And in the show, when he says mercy, I wasn't sold. But in the book, just hearing through this man's mind of how horrified he was at what happened, and his willingness to prevent something like that from happening again, it worked. It made sense to me. And you get a lot, I don't know, maybe it's because you also get less of Cersei. So there's a lot less of she's very clearly going to use this to betray him. Maybe there's a degree of underestimating her that works because you aren't hearing or seeing much of her compared to the show. Anyway, I can't outwardly think right now what else was done better in the show. Maybe the scene where Viserys gets the crown of gold? I don't know. Some things are naturally amplified by music and good editing. So I'm going to go instead to things in the book, set pieces, chapters that were done so much better in the book. First thing comes to mind. Traveling to the Vale. Catelyn climbing the Vale. Or the Eyrie, whatever the fuck they call it. Completely different. In the show, I get it, budgetary reasons, it seemed like not a problem at all. I mean, they say it out loud, like, this is impenetrable, but it didn't look that impenetrable. In the book, again, through the power of descriptive language, this is a trek. This whole journey to get up to this, I don't know, the Eyrie, the Vale, to get up there, was riveting stuff that you never got. You never got any of that. You never got, a true meeting with the Blackfish. And then the backstory there. Oh my gosh. What is going on the road here? I'm trying to talk about Game of Thrones, and you guys want to friggin' honk your horns? You distracted me. Anyway, pretty much everything involving Catelyn, Tyrion, and the Vale is is dynamite compared to the show. Again, not bad in the show, but everything is so much more fleshed out. The world, the inconquerability of the Vale itself, the actual threat, the climbing it takes, the girl that helps Catelyn along, who I think is Robert's bastard. I forgot her name. Speaking of bastards, another thing I love, and maybe this was mentioned in the show, but I don't think it was, that you just hear a lot more about the bastards and how they are treated in the world, and I really enjoyed that each section has a different last name, or a different name that they would give to the bastards, which, that being said, it very, very well could have been the case in the show, but I don't remember them ever mentioning anyone other than Ramsay and Jon, who both were called Snow. But Storm's End bastards being called Storm, friggin' Flowers, blah, blah, blah. Like, I just really liked that. It's a minor thing. I'm going to go right back to gassing up the Catelyn chapter, but I absolutely love reading about the bastard children, and I'm sure there's going to be way more of it in Clash of Kings, which I just started, by the way. Anyway, before that Vale chapter with Catelyn, you have, I believe it's a Tyrion chapter, when they're making their way up and they're attacked by the mountain clans. Wow, what a freaking battle that was. Again, in the show, constrained by budget, it was sort of it was a nothing thing. I think Tyrion kills someone with a shield, maybe. There's the joke where he's like, I'm willing if she is still there, and it's still great, but I don't know, there's so much more tension hearing about the other men that are there and how they approach, and it's sort of an introduction to Bronn as well. Bronn is fucking, Bronn versus Knight Sir, I don't know who he is. Bronn versus the guy in the Trial for Combat. Or Trial for Combat? Trial by Combat, I think. Yeah, anyway. Oh my gosh. Riveting stuff. And I really enjoyed what I thought that they wouldn't be able to top it. But that was stupid of me. The show version. But no. So many more little details in the book version. The sword that she gives the knight, that's Jon Arryn's sword, but Catelyn realizes it's not something he's more comfortable with, that holds him back. Just a great fight. And they didn't include the line where she says, you don't fight with honor, and then Bronn's like, he did. That was awesome. I was waiting for that in the book. Didn't come. I guess there are pros to TV adaptations after all. Anyway, everything with the Vale and the Eyrie was awesome. Specifically, the battle with the Mountain Men. Just, I don't know, something about that whole interaction was epic. It just felt like more of a quest to take Tyrion up there than it was a bit easy in the show. So I love that. Daenerys. I want to talk about Daenerys because I had been told prior. Both my friend and Cosmonaut Marcus said that the Daenerys chapters were very uninteresting. And maybe that is true for later on, because unless these are completely different plot lines in the book versus the show, I can't imagine too much riveting stuff is going to happen when she gets to Meereen and she starts, stopping slavery there. So maybe that's where all the Daenerys stuff is boring came from. But I did not feel that at all for her chapters in this book. I thought the description of Khal Drogo and the Dothraki and their rules and their ways and their culture was great shit. I found it interesting. There are certain sections where maybe he gets a little bit too wordy, a little bit too descriptive about what fucking emeralds are in the palace or whatever she goes into. I'm not going to deny that. I wouldn't say it's a flaw, but it actually distracted me at one point. I just wish that you would let me turn, please. I just wish that you would let me turn, because then I can turn and I can finish the point I was making about Game of Thrones. Thank you. Thank you so much. So he loves to describe, as any good author does, he loves to describe what someone is wearing when they appear. Or, if it's a woman, he loves to describe how big their tits are. But usually, I'm okay with this. In fact, I appreciate it. Character shows up, what does their crest look like? What is on their shield? What rubies and gems and gold is on Jaime Lannister's armor? In fact, it also does its own world building. Oh, yeah, that was great. Anytime you get to see this knight who is not done anything, but he's mentioned, and he has a lore, and he has a history, and Ned maybe offhandedly mentions that he unseated this character at a jousting competition at one of the King's tournaments, and that 3 chapters from now, you also see that character, but from a different perspective, and then they again mention he was unseated by the stupid Knight of Flowers in the when Catelyn meets with Walder Frey. I loved, actually, the Walder Frey, how he was written was great. Just a fucking old man rambling 3 paragraphs straight of just saying what's on his mind. That was awesome. Speaking of saying on his mind, that's what I'm doing because I can't get to my point. Anyway, I liked the descriptive language he used up until the very end, where it was very distracting. Because it wasn't Joffrey. It was right before Ilyn Payne takes Ned's head, where I'm fully immersed in this chapter. And I have another side note to get on that I'm going to stay on topic briefly. It mentions, Ilyn Payne takes ice and walks up to the podium. And then it's he was wearing a Gucci he was wearing a Gucci scarf with fucking black turtleneck, and embroidered in the turtleneck was custom fucking patchwork and crisp Jordans. It was cracking me the fuck up. Usually it's good, and it adds to the world, and it really impacts what you're reading. But it was the first moment where I was like, okay, get to what's happening. You don't need to describe the drip on every character that appears on screen. Ilyn Payne walks up preparing to take my father's head. He was wearing custom Navy SEAL leather-bound boots, and he smelled like fresh cologne. That was killing me. But other than that, the writing is solid. Is a way to put it. Well written, but at a certain point, Jesus Christ, you don't have to describe everything they're wearing. Just a nitpick. The tangent I was going to go off on. And I'm home now, so I'm going to wrap this up. Ned Stark, classic decoy protagonist, incredible shock killing him at the end of the first season. It's even more ballsy in the book. It's even more casual in the book. And I expected it to be from a Ned chapter, the way that I've been spoiled that the Red Wedding happens through a Catelyn chapter. That's what I thought was going to happen in the Ned chapter. But instead, the last you hear from Ned is three chapters prior to when he actually gets killed in the dungeon with Varys. And then you get his death through the Arya chapter, and even that is not concrete. I mean, it is if you can read between the lines, but they're Arya is taken away and she hears a noise. Obviously, you know what that noise is, but it wasn't the focus. And then in the next, you get the Bran chapter, where again, you're all the way in Winterfell. So if you were still reading this for the first time, you're like, is Ned dead? And then they go down to the crypts, and that was actually a fantastic chapter. I love that chapter. But again, that being sort of the confirmation that you get, oh, he is dead, from the Raven arriving at the very end, but mostly from Rickon and Bran both seeing Ned in their dreams. That was a crazy way to confirm it. And then you get the immediate aftermath with Sansa instead. It was... I had to close the book and be like, damn, that was even more game-changing than I could have expected. I cannot imagine reading that for the first time. Well, I can imagine it, but I bet I'm wrong about how shocking it truly was to have that. Like, I would probably be flipping back 3 chapters, 4 chapters after to be until Sansa literally says they murdered my father, to be like, did Ned Stark just get killed? Just like that. It was actually it was fantastic, and it's sad. It's actually it's fantastic, but it's very heartbreaking because, again, I like Ned even more in the book, and he's killed so much more dismissively in the book, and now he's gone, and now I'm sad. That being said, fantastic book. Fantastic book. And I've already started, as I said. I'm going to make my way through this journey with the hope that when I'm done, Winds of Winter will come out. Which it won't. But if it does, you heard it here first. Got any last thoughts off the top of my head? No. Other than double thumbs up. I'm happy to be now included in conversations. Except when they start talking about John Connington, and I'll be like, wait, I'm not there yet. I don't know who that is. I'm making my way. I'm excited for Clash of Kings. I'm very excited for that. R.I.P. Ned Stark. Hope nothing bad happens to those Starks. Hope they get a happy ending. Okay, goodbye. One more thing. I'm not done. I remembered that I had forgotten. This is what I want to talk about. R plus L equals J. Spoiler alert. That was much more obvious than I expected. I'm going to be honest. So, the legend of that theory, super cool. When it got confirmed in the show, super cool. I had assumed that, without doing a full history dive, I had assumed that the books were maybe kind of vague about what happened with Lyanna and the whole history there, about Robert's rebellion. Because the show was certainly very vague about it, about what happened. But one thing I loved about the book is within the first 100 chapters, you get a lot of the history. Ned is happy to think about it. George is happy to describe what went down and all the characters that were involved. And I have to say, within the first 100 chapters, there is like 4 different references to Jon's mother and Lyanna Stark. Every single time Ned thinks about Lyanna Stark in this book, which is a lot, underneath it goes, "Promise me, Ned." And then the very next chapter will be a Jon Snow chapter where at some point he will go in that same underneath line in the italics, "Oh, who is my mother? She was a whore, obviously. But even if she is a whore, I wonder who she is. Why was my father never talk about it?" And I'm sitting here and I'm like, okay, obviously my brain has been slightly warped by, I know that it's what it is. Maybe I wouldn't have felt this way if I was coming into this series. But I think I maybe would have figured it out. Or at least I now realize that this had to have been figured out the second the first book was released. By many people. It is not subtle. And I thought and it's still fantastic, but they reference it so often. Within the first book, they mention the bloody bed that Lyanna's on. Promise me, Ned. Promise me, Ned. If you come into this series without knowing anything, and you are the type of reader that, by the end of a book, can understand the characters and the motivations outside of what is directly written on the page, then you had to have been able to figure this out. All you have to do is ask yourself, by the end of Ned Stark, is he the type of person that is going to fuck someone that is not his wife? No. Does he ever call Jon Snow his son? No. He says he's his blood. He consistently references the promise that he has to keep. And in every Jon chapter, he's like, "Who's my mom?" Yeah. like it's still incredibly well told. It's not a criticism at all. I just had to say it because I was thinking of it the entire time. Like I just know that people figured that out right away. It did not take as many books as I thought. Anyway, I'm gonna go now. That's all I wanted to say. Great book. Can't wait. Can't wait to keep reading.